Hi Mags. Hello,
Hi,
thank you so
Julie.
much for chatting to me today. I'm very excited for this one.
Yes, no problem. It's lovely to meet you.
No, I feel like we're e-meeting everyone these days. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. For anyone who doesn't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Mags Hall. I'm a Green Party activist. Live over in Dunfermline. I am our one of our lead candidates for the Mid Scotland and Fife region in the upcoming election. And I have a background in food sovereignty and local food campaigning. And I'm now the Green Party's lead researcher on food and agriculture issues in the Scottish Parliament.
That's amazing. You sound like you're probably the most busiest woman in Scotland right now, which is great. But yeah, can you tell us a bit more about food sovereignty? Actually, there's just so much I kind of want to know about it, and it feels very refreshing to be able to talk to someone who has got a background in food and politics as well. So I feel very good.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, food sovereignty is kind of the movement that I would say my food politics most closely aligns with, and it's a global movement that started in the global south, particularly with being spearheaded by peasant farmers who were involved in land rights battles. But it's since then grown to encompass countries both in the north and in the south, and it brings together food and environmental issues with social justice issues in politics. And the core principle is that the people who produce the food and also the people who consume the food should have an integral say in how our food system's controlled. And it sits in opposition to the food system that most of us live and experience in the world, which is very much corporate controlled, and the power lies sort of in the middleman. It lies a lot in distribution and retail companies, and it also lies in seed and agriculture companies as well. So the people who are actually producing the food and the people who are eating the food are less important, and the money and the power lies elsewhere. So that was a movement that I got involved in about 10 years ago now, and really sparked my interest in not just food as something that's enjoyable and pleasurable and fun to learn and know about, but also food as politics as well.
Yeah, I think like actually after reading up about you today and all the kind of other days that we've been looking into it, I was just like, wow, it is, as I was saying, so refreshing to see politics and food come hand in hand because it's so connected in so many ways. And I think we're seeing it like loads more so now in the news and in the media because of coronavirus, and we're seeing kind of hospitality industry being kind of brought to light. But also on top of that, one of the kind of issues in the back of my head as a restaurant owner is that we have maybe taken a bit of a kind of blind eye towards sustainability and our kind of effects with foods and environment in the globe right now because there's been so much else going on. I don't know if you lost me there, my connection's terrible, but I think yeah, it's just very kind of interesting to hear about all the changes that are being made, obviously with our kind of political movement within the EU that actually changes our food system so much. So what would you actually, one of the questions that I was thinking is, what is the kind of biggest changes you've seen to our food policies since we've kind of, I guess, left the EU? I know that's quite a big question, but I guess from like the kind of consumer point of view, you're seeing less products in supermarkets and stuff. And as a restaurateur, you're seeing a bit of a higher kind of price point on things.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is I think at the moment, with it's only been, well, as we speak, it's the start of March here. So it's only actually been a couple of months since we fully left the EU. And that has obviously coincided with being in a global pandemic. So,
yeah, totally.
Over the last year or so, it's hard to say exactly what effects have come from Brexit and what effects have come from the pandemic, because some of them are fairly distinct, but then there's a lot of overlapping effects as well. So things like price rises and stuff can be both affected by the implementation of tariffs and of new administrative costs with us leaving the European Union, but prices have also been impacted by the complete collapse, so to speak, of certain supply chains and of certain avenues of supply as well. So with restaurants closing, and hospitality being shut for such long periods of time. On the one hand, we have producers who have surplus of stock, but that doesn't automatically make things cheaper. It's the economics of food are very complicated, and I think both Brexit and the pandemic have really highlighted just how complex these systems are, and again how it's not the farmers who are in control of this food system.
No, totally.
It's not the customers who are going to the supermarkets to buy it as well. You know, we are kind of the beginning and the end of a very complex chain. Which over the last few generations, you know, on the one hand has given us a great amount of variety and has given us cheap foods, because food in the UK is cheap. It doesn't feel cheap if you're on a low income and you're struggling to feed your family and you're having to go to food banks. It's really not cheap. But from an economic point of view, it is cheap. So the food system's been very successful in delivering that. But what we've seen from both Brexit and the pandemic, and even just things like bad weather, is it's extremely vulnerable to changes and to threats. And the smallest thing or a big thing can knock it off course and have huge impacts as well.
Totally, yeah. I think like you're absolutely right. Like it feels like there's loads of kind of varying factors at the moment that are changing the food systems and prices and sustainability and everything. And like you often get asked as a restaurant owner, like what ingredients have you seen go up in price? What have you seen less of? And to be honest with you, you're absolutely right. I struggle to answer these questions sometimes. So I don't know the true facts as to whether this is a trading route that's affected because of Brexit, or whether this could be a weather thing as well. It's just, there's so many varying factors. And I think with the food scene kind of being, actually, because food is the only thing that, well, not the only thing, but it's one of the main things that I think is getting people through at the moment. All these kind of restaurants are doing dine at home things. So I guess the food industry and hospitality is kind of like hot in everyone's minds at the moment, which has actually been quite nice to see, just because it means that there's lots of kind of issues being brought up. And actually, I think talking to yourself today is quite good, because when you are in the kind of industry, you are bamboozled by all of these different things that are extremely complex to understand. So yeah, and I guess we as a restaurant are trying to focus a wee bit more on sustainability and trying to, like, I guess I cook Malaysian food, so the kind of essence of it is that we are cooking food that comes from quite far away. So how could we make that a bit more kind of ecologically friendly? How can we work on things? We've been trying to get, I guess, less packaging and things like that. And then I often wonder, where do these kind of changes happen? Does it happen with the kind of bigger chains, with the distribution side of things? Or is it maybe like ourselves when we go to the supermarket every day? Is it when we kind of choose what supermarkets we go to and what kind of produce we're buying, whether that's in plastic wrapping? But yeah, just actually, I guess maybe to kind of hear your thoughts on that too, of like where the biggest changes happen, if that's kind of at the top or whether that starts with the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it's everywhere, and everyone needs to do what they can. There has, though, over the last few years, there has been, I mean, I would say over the last decade or so, food sustainability has had, certainly in the UK, there's been a huge focus on the individual, and it's been pitched as, almost as a lifestyle choice. People who are able to choose organic produce and choose to shop with their local suppliers, and make a choice to go and find it's up to consumers to go and hunt out lower packaging and like zero waste shops and the likes, and that's great. And there has been a really big shift, particularly in our cities in Scotland, towards providing more alternative shops and alternative suppliers for produce both locally and abroad, and it's really good and I support that. But unfortunately, it has meant that the wider discussion has focused very much on the individuals and not on this bigger supply chain. If we take food waste, for example, there's been, food waste is a huge problem across our food system. And at a policy level, Scottish Government has funded an organisation to deliver a lot of education work in schools and, you know, with community centres and the likes over the last 10 years or so to help households reduce their food waste, which is great. But we've not seen any similar actions at government level to motivate. Well, actually, I say there's not. There has been a small amount of work done with restaurants on things like restaurants to offer takeaway bags for their products, things like that. But there's been not nearly the same level of focus on activity on the waste that comes in the hospitality and the eating out of home sector. And then we hardly ever hear about the waste that comes within the supply chain. So waste before products even get to the supermarket, you know, fruit and vegetables that are rejected because they're not the right size or they're not the right shape, or one of the big sources of waste in the UK in the supermarket supply chain comes from supermarket contracts and supermarkets changing their contracts.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So there has been some work to try and tighten up. There was a groceries code introduced and a groceries code adjudicator about 5 or 6 years ago now that's based at the UK level, which is sought to try and get fairer contracts. But it still goes on. I mean, supermarkets they're built on a just-in-time model, so they'll order stuff like a year in advance, but it'll only farmers will go out and they'll plan all their farming, their crop schemes, and they'll get all their vegetables in the ground based on what supermarkets tell them they want for the next year, but they won't actually buy it. Supermarkets won't buy it until it leaves the farm.
That's awful.
Sometimes they'll turn around and say, oh, actually, do you know what, don't want it now. There was a few years ago, there was a massive glut of broccoli in Scotland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I can't remember, I think it was like 2014, 2015 or something. We had a really hot summer. And people don't eat broccoli when it's hot. You don't have a when it's hot, you want a salad or like
I feel like you can make it a salad-friendly component though.
Supermarkets don't want broccoli when it's hot, and so like one of the major supermarkets like cancelled loads of contracts with broccoli because they didn't want it or so. And you know, there literally is, again, thinking back to the supply chain, the power of the dominance is for big retailers. And so it means that farmers find it very difficult to find alternative sources for their produce, which has been one of the big difficulties in the pandemic, is suppliers are locked into contracts and they're locked into supply chains. And when those supply chains fail, or when their product isn't needed in that supply chain, it's very difficult for them to find elsewhere to sell their produce. And so often there's entire fields of vegetables get ploughed back in again because there's no one to buy it. So yes,
it just breaks your heart.
This is like
I know.
Personal choice is important, but personal choice without system change is not going to have it's not going to have the big impact that we need to tackle things like food waste and packaging and you know, food miles and the likes that all together contribute towards the environmental impact of our food system.
I think this is so interesting actually, because I mean, I would have never have known about the broccoli problem of 2014, 2015 had you not told me. And I think sometimes I wonder whether like that communication, and again, going back to my initial point, that it is such a kind of refreshing talk to have a talk with someone who is so heavily involved in politics, but also so knowledgeable about food and all the kind of diverse systems that we have around that. I actually just made me think of that chef, I think his name is Massimo Bottura, and there was a problem with the parmesan industry, I think, in Italy a couple of years ago, and he ended up developing a recipe which made everyone in their homes use parmesan loads. And I wonder like whether we have to start being like more communicative down the chain, whether at distribution level there's an issue there kind of thing that goes into politics, and then you can work with chefs to maybe try and make a broccoli household dish, make everyone have it that week on a Wednesday or something. But I think as you're saying, like I wouldn't have known half of the kind of issues that were going on there.
I think there are things that like restaurateurs and supermarkets and things can do that that can help. But we also need to, I mean, for me anyway, the fundamental issue is about diversifying our our food system and diversifying our supply chains, so that if we do find ourselves, well, first of all, diversifying farm businesses so that farmers aren't just relying on one or two crops that they sell all to the same supermarket. We've pushed farmers into this economic model. If you go out and speak to farmers, you're not going to meet to somebody who's like, I love broccoli. All I want to do is grow fields and fields of broccoli. That's
totally.
It's much easier for them. It's more secure for them to grow one or two crops, do a really big lot of it, and sell it all to the same supplier, because there's not that many alternatives. So if we can, first of all, support farmers to diversify so that they're growing a range of different things, and if one of those crops fails, or if the demand drops for it or whatever, it's not such a big economic impact on their business. They've got other things that they can rely on. But also diversify where those crops are going to. So shorten supply chains, make sure that more produce is going either direct to local consumers or direct into things like local public procurement. Take farmers going direct at like school meals, for example. And having also more smaller local retailers as well. So again, farmers are selling to a range of shops, not just one big supermarket. You're spreading the risk out a lot more. And in all other businesses, that's the model that you would choose. But we've built this system over the last 50 years that's just concentrated things so much. It becomes very hard for farmers to break out of that model.
Yeah, of course. I think also that's for me part of it. I think about, I'm a bit obsessed with food, so I think about it constantly, but this is the part that I don't get to hear about that much, and actually would love to understand that more. And also the way you're talking about how it can go into different supermarkets and supply chains and things like that. One thing that I've been seeing loads of, especially in Glasgow where I live, is that there's been a huge rise in sustainable kind of supermarkets. So I guess you're getting these amazing places popping up which they have kind of limited packaging, where they'll use kind of local produce to try and sell that, which I am absolutely behind. I love it. I think it's great. And also just to see the demand for it, because there has been such a rise of them kind of opening up all over the city. I wouldn't know about anywhere else because I've not been anywhere because of lockdown, but I imagine it might be the same in kind of big cities.
Yeah, I know. There's been some great examples in Glasgow over the years, and like Locavore springs to mind. Love the guys at Locavore; they've been doing a great job.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Pioneering the way a few years back that's now kind of got a model that other people are delivering. If you go outside Glasgow or Edinburgh, it's really hard to find anything. So I'm over.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm in Dunfermline. It's a decent sized town. Dunfermline's a town of over 50 people now. We've got an all right high street, but I can't get fruit and veg anywhere in Dunfermline unless I go to a supermarket. We've got a butcher's, which is quite good, but I get most of my food delivered from local businesses where I can. But there's a real disparity between the food movement in Scotland cities and in Edinburgh and Glasgow in particular, and everywhere else in Scotland. Other places have got a long way to go. And again, that's something that policy at all levels could be helping with.
Definitely.
People often say to me, "Oh, what's the biggest thing that that we could change about food policy to make the system better?" And actually, there's just so many things. Our food system is impacted by, at the bottom level, we've got farm subsidies, but then we've also got things like there's funding available for startup businesses. There's a big organisation that promotes Scottish food and drink for export. Really hard to find money if you want to promote your food business locally. Although that's quite difficult. If you want
it's crazy.
We'll give you loads of money for it. But then even things like the planning system and business rates, we could be doing a lot more through planning system and business rates and high street funding to bring food businesses back onto our high streets again. Certainly out with cities, in places like Dunfermline, which has a decent high street, but it's still not, it's not the footfall that it was 10, 20 years ago or so. We still have models that are like, basically the big talk for the last couple of years, and will be for the next couple of years, is in November, is about the shopping centre and about Debenhams, what's going to replace Debenhams. Well, actually, lots of things in Debenhams. The space where we've built the classic in Debenhams, we have so many different shops in it, but
True.
we've got a outdated policy on our high streets, and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that impacts our food system as well.
Yeah, I think like and like what I'd love to see, because obviously like I'm saying like and also I feel like you can sometimes live in your own echo bubble with food as well. Oh, sorry. Not you there. I'm back. Terrible connections these days for me. But yeah, as we were kind of talking about, and as you were saying, like I feel like you can, in Glasgow, I'm obviously saying that you can see loads of things happening with it, and elsewhere maybe not so much in Scotland. And one of the things that always is in the back of my mind is maybe walking through kind of more mainstream supermarkets like your Tesco's, like your Asda's, and there's still so much packaging. And like after we did a wee bit of work just about sustainable eating and cooking and using your waste for COP26, and I think that one of the things that always strikes me is that it feels like it always costs you slightly more to shop sustainably at the moment. Well, not always, but as a generalisation, I would say you need to have a slightly higher income to be able to do that. And actually, like, I always wonder, where does that start with things like government policy? Can that be implemented into distributors, or does that start at the supermarkets? How can we make it a more sustainable way for everyone to shop regardless of budget?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there is no easy answer.
Yeah.
It all comes back to how complicated our food supply chain is, because there are lots of different ways that you can have levers and you can pull policy here and there, but it has to be done incrementally and with lots of different changes. There's not like one big answer to that.
Yeah.
I would certainly say one of the biggest steps that we could do in Scotland and with the powers of the Scottish Parliament is reforming agricultural subsidies, so that we are actively subsidising the foods that we need to be eating more of, i.e. fruit and veg, and we're reducing the subsidies on the things that are harmful to both us and to the planet, i.e. meat. Our farming subsidies are the other way round in Scotland, so the bulk of farming subsidies go towards beef and sheep production.
Okay.
Beef and sheep production gets the bulk of it. Slightly less goes to the likes of pork and chicken production and egg production. There are fairly decent subsidies for arable production and for arable crops. But fruit and veg is right at the bottom of the pile.
Wow.
It's absolutely minimal. If you're in horticulture, it's absolutely minimal the amount of produce that you get. And in actual fact, if you're under a certain size, you don't get anything at all. So traditionally in Scotland, we had a really rich market gardening culture, particularly in East and West Lothian and around about Glasgow as well. So our cities were surrounded by lots and lots of small farms, and it was literally just, the size of a field, and there would be somebody just doing market gardening, producing loads of fruit and veg on quite small areas that would then sell direct into the cities. And that's pretty much gone now in Scotland. There are still, East Lothian in particular, and in Fife, there are decent sized veg farms, and in the Tay Valley, there's fruit productions and things like that. But that kind of small scale, diverse market gardening is gone, because the system doesn't pay you to do it. We're paying people to have huge, expansive sheep farms, and then they struggle to sell their produce because people are eating less. So we pay to produce lamb on these big extensive farms, which can be done in a sustainable way, but often isn't done. And then we actively promote people to eat that lamb because there's not a natural market for it. So it's just all that's just an example, and I don't want to any particular sector or whatever, because it's not the industry's fault. It's our fault for having produced a system that does that. So there's so much that we could do just by taking the same amount of money that we're spending on subsidising agriculture, but just turning it on its head and being like, okay, what is our goal here? If our goal is to make sustainable, healthy food more affordable, then these are the things that we should be funding it with.
The
other thing, just fundamentally, that we need to do is make sure everybody has enough money to live off, which
Yeah.
is, I think we shy away from, so my background in working in food sovereignty and in community food activism, talking, before I got involved in politics myself, talking to politicians was one of the most frustrating things ever, because all they were talking about was like, we can't make food more expensive because, you know, people are really struggling, folk have to go to food banks. And again, that's a political choice. And it's not the food system's fault. The food system doesn't drive people to food banks. It's our absolute bare bones cruel benefit system, and it's our economy that thinks it's okay to pay people slave wages. That's the problem there, not the food system. So if if everybody had was earning a fair wage or had a fair income coming in through a universal basic income system or whatever, then it levels the playing field again. So people have more money in their pockets and are able to then spend more money on food, which then goes back to farmers to reward them for producing food in a sustainable way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like even that logic of just having like a fair wage, basic living wage as well, that could be applied for so many industries, because often working in food industries can be seen as quite a low paid job actually. So it's therefore not appealing for people to get into it. And you do see quite a lot of people struggling. And I think like, I mean, for me, like we always try and pay everyone living wage in the restaurant, but it's a hard thing to do because you've then got everything to pay on top of that, but you make your business work around that. I think that if there was a bit more of an incentive to get into these industries, then we would have a lot more kind of political awareness about it, and also kind of, I guess, a want to be able to change things too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody should have to do a stint working in hospitality at some point.
Everyone, I think that should become the next thing to come into Parliament, is everyone should work in the hospitality industry for about a year, and then that should give you all of the goods and the bads and the ups and the downs. And it'll probably make you a bit of a stronger person for it too. But yeah, I think it's just really interesting. And also then, again, this is just another hand-in-hand kind of example of food and politics, and I guess the kind of social aspect of food as well. Like we see actually, and it's one of those industries where like I'd love to campaign for more people to come into food, because you actually don't need a background in university training to get into it. And it's actually something you can go on and you can learn in the job, and you don't have to study for years. So therefore, I guess economically it's a cheaper role for you to get into because you're not studying for as long. And there's still so many things that can come out of it. I would love to be able to kind of help people get into that role. And also, I guess there's so many, for me, again, another thing, the place that I probably follow the most in Glasgow would probably be Milk Cafe. They just do amazing work for integrating refugees into the community, helping refugees get work within kitchens as well. And I just kind of love to see more policy to make that easier for employers like myself to be able to be like, okay, great, I want to teach this person, get over any language barriers, and like welcome this person into the kitchen and put things on their CV. That'd be great, kind of thing. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see more of that within politics too. I think there's just so many things to think about with it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's loads of opportunities, and we kind of recognise it to an extent. You know, there are, you know, like apprenticeship programs that people can get into, you know, and job training schemes that employers can sign up for. But all too often, first of all, you know, I don't think they're the easiest things as an employer to get into, because there's all sorts of bureaucracy and levels of accreditation. But again, apprenticeships pay poverty wages. Like apprentices earn way below the minimum wage, like not even
exactly
wage, whatever. So it's seen as this good thing for an employer to do, but then we expect the people who are serving apprenticeships to I mean, basically, you can't do an apprenticeship unless you're still living at home with your parents, basically. These days.
And I really struggle with that. Imagine if you were to hire someone in who's doing the same job as your other members of staff, who they are getting paid a high, far wage than the person who's an apprentice. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and there's also, so there's other schemes like Community Jobs Scotland, which is a scheme whereby employers can take on young people. I think it's like 16 to 24. If you're not in education or training, you can get a Community Jobs Scotland placement, and basically the DWP, or I think it's Scottish Social Security now, will pay that person's wages. But it's a short-term contract. So I think Community Jobs Scotland lasts 6 months. And so if you're an employer and you get somebody and you get their wages paid for them for 6 months, which is great, but that 6 months comes to an end, and inevitably the employer then unfortunately has to let them go, even if they really want to. You know, especially because those jobs are often in third sector organisations or the likes. So it's like, why are we using government money to pay people to be in insecure employment, which they're then going to be unemployed at the end of it?
Totally. And I think there's also that double-edged sword. I mean, we've been approached, I can't remember exactly who by, but people saying that, right, okay, we pay, I think it's maybe like a certain percentage of the wage, and then you take this person on for a while. For us, yeah, that's fine. I would love to get people in like that, but what I would hate would be for that, and I know it probably would be in some places, for that system to be abused, whereby restaurants or bars or wherever just keep on hiring people in because they're getting half of the wages paid for them. And then I think that's abuse of that system too. So it's such a kind of, it's a mental playing field where I'm always just trying to figure out what's the best way. But I both agree with the fact that it helps people get into work, but also there's a kind of, I guess, an opportunity there for that system to be, I guess, mishandled.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, I don't know if I would say I was confident in this, but I do hope that the pandemic and the support schemes like the furlough scheme and the likes that have been put in place in a very short space of time have changed both the public's perceptions, but also our political generation, you know, our politicians and our upcoming politicians. I hope it's changed their idea about what governments can do, and that people realise it doesn't, like, absolutely in a global pandemic, it's the right thing to do to subsidise people's wages and to make sure people don't lose jobs. But fundamentally, this is the government's responsibility all the time, not just in a pandemic. It's a government's responsibility to make sure that our society is fair and it's equal and people have opportunities, and that we're regulating and supporting work in a way that genuinely pays for people to be in work, but benefits employers as well. So this is by no means my area of expertise, and I'm not super familiar with all the different like regulatory mechanisms or job support schemes and the likes, but I just hope that this has shown that there's so many things that are possible, and governments have so much control and so much power. Whether we have it in Scotland without being independent is another question, but in the meantime, like, we just have to open our minds to what is possible. But it's really important that we start with an end goal in sight, so we know what it is we're trying to do by either subsidising the food system or by supporting jobs or whatever.
Yeah, I think actually, as you're saying, as a whole, like, it's a very interesting time, because, and obviously the pandemic has just been awful for so many people, but one thing I would say it has made people is incredibly politically aware. Everyone's very engaged right now with what our government are doing, and I feel like for me it's the perfect time for really good change to happen, because you've got everyone's attention. Everyone's very much kind of waiting to see what the next news bulletin is, what's kind of happening on social media or via news. And yeah, very interesting time to kind of, I guess, make good change, especially when everyone is so aware of what's going on. But yeah, I think actually one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about is, I guess, women in the food industry. There's been a lot of kind of amazing campaigns in Glasgow of places kind of supporting refugee women get into kitchens. And that obviously is something that's quite close to my heart, because that's, I guess, how I ended up opening up the restaurants. My mum immigrated from Malaysia. And it'd just be quite, I guess, this might be a broad question, but maybe more a kind of chatting point of how, I guess, political parties can have involvement in that, and how there can maybe be support for, I guess, any kind of migrant workers coming over to get into kitchens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something I'm super knowledgeable about, specifically around like migrant workers' rights. But Um, I think the benefits, as you've said, there's been really amazing examples, both in Glasgow, and I'm aware of some projects in Edinburgh as well around bringing people together and
Yeah.
getting migrant workers into kitchens. All too often, it's from what I've seen, certainly the projects I'm aware of, particularly in Edinburgh, it's often done on a voluntary basis. So we're bringing kitchens, and we're doing it like nice community meals and getting people together, which is great, which is really powerful and stuff. But and the women's situations often mean that they're barred from actually earning a living from that or going into commercial kitchens. So there are definitely improvements that we can make around people's right to work and people's access into workplaces, and making sure that people are aware of those rights as well, so that it's a positive experience for them, and that they're not abused or find themselves in illegal working conditions. At the moment in Scotland, that's one of the things that we have very little control over in the Scottish Parliament. It's kind of immigration law and support for refugees and asylum seekers is still devolved to the UK government. And the government has a cruel and racist policy on that front. So this is one of the big talking points around independence. Over the last few years, the Scottish Parliament has had a lot of new powers come to it, and certainly as Greens, there's a lot more that we could have done over the last 5 or 6 years or so to really maximise those powers. But there are definitely things that we remain blocked from doing and from making a difference. And immigration rights is one of those. So yeah, it's something that we would campaign strongly for. In the first instance, we campaigned strongly for these rights to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament.
Definitely.
And scrap the Home Office in Scotland. Again, Home Office, racist institution. So yeah, we could be campaigning for that in the short term, but realistically, it's those powers are not forthcoming to us, and are to be devolved at all. So it is something that we should be looking forward to post independence.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's something, actually, I guess, something that I would support, being the daughter of a migrant worker. My mum came over here back in the 70s to become a nurse, and it's, I mean, just when you see the kind of the rights that migrant workers have now, and I guess now, especially in the time of pandemic, when I kind of look back and I'm like, wow, she made that decision to come over here all of those years ago, kind of thing. It's something that's so important that we need to kind of focus on.
And I do think,
hopefully.
again, as I said earlier on, we've not seen the full impacts of Brexit yet. And I think one of the biggest impacts of Brexit, which we've definitely not seen, is going to be the loss of European workers in both hospitality, but also in the food supply chain as well. We rely very heavily at all levels of the food chain in Scotland on seasonal workers, and over the last couple of generations, those seasonal workers have come from Europe, they're not domestic. So I think it's going to be a big wake-up call for the wider population when we start to see the full impact of that, when we start to see hospitality reopening, particularly in rural areas. The Highlands and Islands depends very heavily on European migrant workers to support their hospitality, which in turn is kind of the bedrock of their tourist industry. This summer, if it goes like last summer, could potentially be a bumper year for Scottish tourism and hospitality in rural areas, but it won't be if they don't have the staff to work there. And I mean, we'll have to wait and see, because with all these places closed at the moment, we don't quite know, but it's certainly predicted to be a really serious issue and a really serious shortfall.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you kind of look at the, I guess, on the ground logistics of, none of us have been on a holiday in so long. We'll maybe travel up north, take the car, maybe stay at a hotel. And the kind of, I guess, when I was looking at places up north and rural kind of hotels and places in the hospitality industry, it's so sad to see the number that have just had to completely close and are really struggling with the bills that you get from having such big properties like hotels, and I guess you might end up losing all your workers as well. So it's just, one of those things that I feel like, again, to go back to that point, everyone is so politically aware right now because everything affects you so much with the pandemic, that hopefully these issues that we raised over the next couple of weeks will help sway decision for people to kind of, I guess, to go out and vote, to think about these things. So yeah, a very kind of crazy time to be in politics. It's crazy, but also I think a very good time for change.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and nobody wants a crisis, and
No,
nobody should look to profit from a crisis. But we have to
no,
find opportunities, and certainly people's growing awareness and people's change in perceptions of what is possible is something
yeah,
that we absolutely have to build on, and we have to encourage people to expect more. Like, we
yeah,
should be asking so much more from
yeah,
our politicians and from our governments, and we
yeah,
know it's possible,
yeah.
but we need to expect more. Go into that voting box and vote like our future depends
I
on it.
know, I know. And I think when you look at how many kind of resources people have needed over the pandemic, over the past year, it does show you how quickly things can be done. Especially when there's, like, I guess, furlough, you've got so many other bits and bobs that have kind of happened, grants and things like that too, because we have needed it. And I think hopefully people can recognise the stuff that maybe has gone wrong along the way, and how we can hopefully improve for this
Mhm.
time next year. Fingers and toes crossed if that is the case.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think thank you so much for chatting to me today. There's so much
I know.
like content, and I don't even know where to begin sometimes, because I guess especially around food, there's so much, it comes hand in hand with politics. And again, there's just so much that I didn't know actually before this conversation about agriculture, about our kind of distribution methods. So thank you so much for talking to me. I'm kind of walking away from this restaurant owner with a tiny bit more knowledge, and I'm sure I'll be going into your inbox with more questions soon. But
No,
yeah, thank you so much for the chat.
no problem at all. I'm on Twitter. I'm always available to have chats about food stuff on Twitter. So people,
Oh,
yourself,
amazing. Right, okay, you're gonna regret that. I'll
if you want
be
to fire
asking
questions,
you a lot.
yeah, I'm at Mags SGP on Twitter. And also, shameless plug, I've got a crowdfunder at the moment to support my election campaign. So if you go to my Twitter, at Mags SGP, top of that, if anybody has liked the conversation and wants to see more women in politics and more women talking about food and agriculture in politics,
Yeah,
it's a very male-heavy space.
exactly,
Then,
exactly.
yeah, if you could pop some money into my crowdfunder and help me get elected in Holyrood in May, I would very much appreciate that.
Yes, we should team up again and become the food and politics team. But yes, thank you so much for everything. I very much
Oh,
appreciate it and wish you well.
yeah, you too, Julie. Lovely to chat to you.
Thank you. Bye.